At my wedding, my haughty in-laws made a show of pointing at me and declared to the guests, "She'll be serving us tonight. It's good training for her." Just then, my mom grabbed the microphone and said, "We have a surprise for the groom's parents." The color drained from their faces. Growing up, it was just me and Mom. Dad bailed when I was just a tyke, a faded memory more than anything else. Mom worked her fingers to the bone, juggling jobs left and right to keep us afloat and to make sure I could hit the books hard. Because of her sacrifices, I snagged a grant that got me through college without the mountain of debt that's so common these days. I studied business management, driven by a cocktail of ambition and the fear of ever being as broke as we were when I was a kid. After graduating, I packed up my life and moved to the city. It was a tough start, living in a cramped apartment and surviving on ramen more nights than I'd like to admit. But I landed a job at a large company, starting as a junior and clawing my way up. Fast forward a few years, and I was not just working there, I was running a whole department. It was more than a job, it was my turf, and I made sure everyone who worked with me knew they were valued. "You got to lead with respect," I'd say during the trainings for the newbies. "Treat this job like you own it, and soon enough, you won't just be part of the team, you'll be leading it." The team was solid, a bunch of good folks. When I got the nod for the department head spot, we hit the local bar to celebrate. It was nothing fancy, just a cozy place where the beer was cold and the laughs were plenty. "Here's to Erica, the boss lady." Marco, one of my oldest colleagues, raised his glass high. The others joined in, the clinks of glasses echoing over the buzz of the bar. "Thanks, guys. We're all in this together." "Here's to kicking more ass and taking names," I shouted over the noise, and the team roared back in approval. That night, amid the backslaps and cheers, I noticed him, Jake. He caught me looking and sauntered over with a grin that could knock you off balance. Couldn't help but notice the celebration. "What's the occasion?" he asked, leaning against the bar. "Just a little career boost. I'm the new head of my department now," I said, trying not to sound too braggy. "That's impressive. Must be a tough gig," he replied, nodding appreciatively. "I'm Jake, by the way." "Erica. Nice to meet you, Jake." We got to talking, more seriously than I intended that night. Turns out, Jake was a financier, knew his way around numbers like I did around project plans. Over the next 6 months, what started as casual dates turned into weekends spent together. And not long after, I was spending more time at his place than my own. He had a killer apartment, high ceilings, a view that made you want to brag about it, and a warmth that my dingy rental couldn't match. One evening, as we were overlooking the city lights from his balcony, Jake turned to me, a serious look washing over his usually playful face. He took my hands in his, and I could feel the nervous energy vibrating through them. "Erica, these past months with you have been the best of my life. I know this might seem fast, but when you know, you just know, right?" He started, his voice a mix of certainty and hope. I nodded, the cityscape blurring a bit as my heart started to race. He pulled out a small box from his jacket and opened it to reveal a ring that caught the light just right, sparkling almost as much as his eyes. "Will you marry me, Erica?" "Yes, Jake. Absolutely yes." I managed, my voice thick with emotion. And just like that, I was engaged. Engaged to a man who saw me, really saw me, and loved all the parts of me, even the ones that were tough as nails. The day I was supposed to meet Jake's parents, my stomach was in knots as Jake drove us up to a sprawling mansion with a driveway longer than my entire apartment block. It hit me, these folks were not just well off, they were loaded. Stepping out of the car, I could feel the weight of the place. The house looked like something out of an old British movie, all brick and ivy, with gargoyles staring down like they knew I didn't belong. Jake squeezed my hand as we walked up to the huge oak doors. "You'll be fine, Erica," he whispered, but his voice sounded like he was trying to convince himself too. The door swung open, and there stood Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove. His suit probably cost more than my rent, and her dress was something you'd see in a magazine. The foyer was massive, with a chandelier overhead that sparkled like a constellation. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking folks with titles like Sir and Lady. "Erica, lovely to finally meet you. I'm Charles, and this is my wife, Eleanor," Mr. Hargrove said, his voice smooth but cool, with a hint of an English accent that sounded practiced. Mrs. Hargrove gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Pleased to meet you both," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady as we moved into the dining room. Jake whispered quick tips about which fork to use for what, but his words were a jumble in my head. Dinner was served, and it felt like sitting in a freezer, the air so cold with judgment. Mr. Hargrove pointed to a portrait of a stern-looking man with a thick beard. "That's Sir Reginald Hargrove, a direct ancestor from England. Came over in the early 1800s, he said proudly." "Really impressive," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic, but it was hard to eat when you felt like every move was being critiqued. I reached for what I thought was the salad fork, but the silence that followed told me I'd messed up. I glanced at Jake for help, but before he could whisper anything, Mrs. Hargrove's voice cut through. "Perhaps things are done differently where you come from, dear," she said, each word sharp and precise. Sorry, still getting the hang of all this, I mumbled, my cheeks burning hot. Jake tried to smooth things over, jumping into a story about us, but his parents were more interested in watching me struggle with the dessert spoon next. I felt smaller with each course, their stares heavy on my shoulders. After the icy dinner, we all shuffled into the Hargroves' expansive living room. The plush carpets and heavy curtains made the room feel even more suffocating than the dining hall. I sunk into one of the ornate chairs, feeling like I was an exhibit in a museum about commoners. Mrs. Hargrove, perched elegantly on the edge of her seat, leaned forward. Erica, dear, tell us more about your family. Your upbringing must have been quite different from ours. I hesitated, feeling Jake's tense gaze on me. Well, it was mostly just me and my mom. My dad left when I was really young, and I don't remember him much. Mom did everything to raise me on her own. She's a nurse. The room fell deathly silent. Mrs. Hargrove stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood floor like a scream. This is unacceptable, she declared, her voice resonating with disgust. We are descendants of an ancient English lineage. We have standards, traditions. I cannot, will not, allow my only son to marry someone without pedigree or knowledge of her own lineage. Mr. Hargrove, who had been silently observing the conversation, finally spoke, his words calculated, each one dropping like a weight. It's essential for us that our family ties are strong and well documented. Erica, can you even name your great-grandparents? I felt my face heat up, the embarrassment gnawing at me. I only know about my maternal grandparents, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hargrove rolled his eyes, a clear sign of contempt. This is exactly what we feared, he muttered under his breath. Jake finally intervened, his tone firm yet pleading. Mom, Dad, please. Erica is kind, hardworking, and she loves me. Isn't that what should matter?